Go. Hello, welcome. I am Christiana Ellis, and I am the Dungeon Master for a new D&D podcast called So Many Levels. We only have one episode out of the play so far. That's my dog. Apologies for that. A new D&D podcast called So Many Levels. We only have one episode out. I'm not talking about my dog. I'm talking about Dungeons & Dragons. So it's a newbie-friendly D&D podcast, not least because I am not first about my dog. I'm talking about Dungeon Master, and a number of my players are pretty new, and so a couple of people who listened, and also some of my players, just mentioned how it might be helpful to talk about the process of character creation and what each of the little elements on the character sheet means and how they work. And I thought that seemed like a good idea. So I'm going to be talking about some of the basics and walking through the process of creating an example character. I won't be able to talk about every single option that you could ever pick because there's just so many, it would take hours and hours. So instead, we're going to make one example character, walk through that process, and talk a little bit about like what are the different features of the character sheet and how those work, and so how you use that for creating a character of your own. So that's the basic idea. If you are a Dungeons & Dragons veteran, you're probably not going to find anything new here. It's going to be sticking to the basics, but I hope you enjoy anyway, or maybe, who knows, you might correct me on something. In Dungeons & Dragons, someone is correcting about a nuance of the rules? That's impossible. So, when it comes to character creation, there are a lot of different approaches that you can use, and I think there's no real wrong answer. But the two basic approaches, I would say, could be summed up as the top-down or bottom-up. And so what I mean by top-down, okay, there's two primary elements to consider when you talk about a Dungeons & Dragons player character. One is, who are they as a person? And the other is, what can they do within the mechanics of the game? So what I would describe as the top-down approach is the idea of, I have a character in mind. I know the kind of person that I would like to play. Maybe the general sorts of things they like to do, the general things that they might be good at or bad at, and what their personality is like. And so I have this character in mind, and I want to find a way to build this character within the rules. And then what I would call bottom up would be to say, I want to start with the mechanics and say, okay, I want a character who is going to be able to do this move and cast spells and that sort of thing. And I want to first build a character that will be able to do those things, and then from there decide, okay, who is this person that can do all of these things I've chosen? Now, both of those methods are perfectly fine, and in fact, most people will kind of go back and forth a little bit, even through the process of creating a single character. You might start with a general concept, and then you start looking, okay, well, what are the general options that might fit with that character concept? Oh, well, if you find one thing that captures your imagination and you say, oh, well, based on this thing, maybe I'll tweak the character idea just a little bit over here so it'll fit with that. And you go back and forth, and it's a process until you zero in on your perfect character. The other element to keep in mind, too, is that I'm not sure there is such a thing as a perfect character, because it's really just about making it fun to play. And there are so many different choices and combinations you could choose that I don't know that it's necessarily super valuable to obsess over each tiny little detail, especially because a lot of the customization options come later. And it's easy enough to create a character. If you start feeling like, you know what, this one isn't fun, then you create another one. Now, that said, creating a character that you can become emotionally attached to will increase your enjoyment of the game. So, lots of things to consider. So, when you are starting the process of creating a character, you can come to the point where you're saying, okay, do you have an idea for a character in mind? Or do you want to start with, I want to be someone who just runs in and fights stuff and hits things and uses weapons, or I want to be someone who casts spells. And then you start saying, okay, well, what are the spell casting options? And then you start thinking, okay, once you have that in place, well, who is this person? So you can really go either way. And so we're going to be doing kind of a hybrid of those two things with our example character today. And we'll make it work. And I hope you enjoy and that it's informative. So to begin, there are a number of data sources that we have to consider. Like, where are we getting the information on the rules and character types and races and classes and so on? Where does that all come from? Well, there are a number of sources. One is that at the Dungeons & Dragons website, you can find a free copy of the basic rules. They have both a PDF version and a web-based version, and that's totally free. You can get it at the website. I'll put the link in the notes, video notes and podcast notes, and you can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is a little bit more limited. It only has 4 races to choose from and only 4 classes to choose from, and it's kind of what you would call a quick build. It's got a lot of the different options that you might choose already kind of narrowed down, and so it's a good way to make a quick character, or to just give you the general sense of how this works. But if you want to make the full-fledged character with all the different options that you might have, then what you're going to need is the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. I'll make sure this is the current version. This is the version for 5th edition, which is the most current version of Dungeons & Dragons. And so if you want to be playing in a 5th edition game, you need the 5th edition material to build your character with. Otherwise, the various abilities and powers and ability scores might not be perfectly compatible in the way you would want them to be. So this book, it's a little pricey if you're new to buying RPG type games, but it contains a lot of material, and it's basically everything you need to know in order to be able to play a basic Dungeons & Dragons game. And really, anything that's not going to be in here is probably either optional or there's ways to get it. So, for example, there are other material sources that you can use. They have Player's Companions in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide and other adventure books that might have additional character creation options. I know they have a book coming out soon called Volo's Guide to Monsters that will have options for making a player character out of a monster. Like, what if you wanted to play as a goblin? They'll have some of those options. So there are lots of different books to choose from, but the Player's Handbook is the best place to start, and it's the primary book that we're going to be working out of today. However, if you just kind of want to dip your toe in a little bit without having to shell out any cash, the basic rules are perfectly good and will allow you to make a full character. It's also on the Dungeons & Dragons website. They have pre-built characters. So you could use them as examples, or if you wanted to just skip this whole process, this lengthy process we're going to go through, and just take a character that someone else has already created, then that's perfectly fine too. And they have those all available at the website for free as well. But you're still going to want to know how the different abilities and scores work. And so that's part of what we're going to talk about. Structure of this video as we continue is we're going to start by just getting into some of the terminology that we're going to use and that fits into this whole thing. So when I say an ability score or a modifier or a proficiency, what does that all mean? And that's stuff that it's the basics, the basic mechanics of the game, and really to be a player, it's ideal that you would understand it. Otherwise, you know, you can get by, but you're going to have a better understanding of what your own character can do if you understand these elements. So we're going to talk a little bit about that terminology. And then when we build our character, we're going to follow the progression that they use in the player's handbook, where they start with the character's race. And in this case, race is not as in our real world races, but rather elf, dwarf, gnome, human, for example. Then your character class, which is, again, not like upper class or lower class. It is what type of character are they and what sort of role might they have within an adventuring party. Then we'll talk about personality and background. Then equipment. And then we'll talk a little bit about what some of the customization and multi-classing options are. Although that's a little advanced, we won't probably spend too much time on that for this video. And then last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about role-playing your character within the game. So first and foremost, let's take a look at the character sheet. So this is the Dungeons & Dragons standard character sheet that is also available for free on their website. And you can see that there's a lot of material here, a lot of empty space, and it's easy to come at this from a new player's perspective and find it somewhat intimidating. And you're not wrong. One of the things that Dungeons & Dragons is it's kind of front-loaded with its complexity, in the sense that creating your character and dealing with all of these different scores is it's not a quick or easy process. It's complicated. But once you have this all settled, it allows you to move forward into the mechanics of the game much more easily, as opposed to something like a video game where you don't necessarily need to know any of those rules up front, and it just gradually would introduce the mechanics one at a time. Now, you might have a dungeon master who is friendly to new players and will help walk you through it too, but in the meantime, we're going to talk a little bit about it here as well. So first, let's just walk down what our different components of this character sheet are. First, so we have up at the top your character name. Here's where you're going to put your real basic stuff, like your player name. A background is something we're going to talk about when we get to the personality and background. Race and class are what we're going to talk about later as well. Alignment is something we'll get into as well when we're talking about personality. But alignment is what we're talking about when we say, are you a good character or an evil character, or neutral? Chaotic good? Lawful evil? You may have seen those 3x3 matrices that go around as memes, and sometimes we'll say, like, take all the Harry Potter characters and fill out this alignment matrix with them. That's where this is coming from. And then experience points is something you will get as you play. When you kill things or accomplish goals, you'll get experience points, and it's how you advance to the next level. So let's leave all of this blank for now, and we'll just continue to walk through the character sheet. So first, let's look a little closer at some of these left-hand columns here. Strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. These are your ability scores, and you can see there's two fields here. There's a main field and a little oval field here. I should add that one of the options they have on the website is a PDF that you can just type into, like this. So we're not going to type into it just yet. Sorry, I've got a lot of windows up. Okay, so these ability scores are part of what define how good your character is at each of these scores. So let's talk about what each of them mean. So to start is strength, And strength is a little more straightforward. It's just literally about like how strong your character is. How powerful are they? And that is going to come into play anytime, for example, you want to swing a broadsword, for example. Lots of times it's used for weapon attacks or physical attacks or punching, or if you want to try to hold the door closed while a monster's trying to bash through it. Those might all be strength checks. And a strength check is so an ability. Okay, let me go through the rest of the abilities first, and then we'll talk a little more about what a check means. So dexterity. Dexterity is like how agile you are, how fast you are, how precise you are when it comes to physical things. Like, are you light on your feet? Are you able to, maneuver through an obstacle course with expert timing and speed? Are you able to throw a dagger and hit your target in a precise way? Are you able to do tie fancy knots and pick locks, that sort of thing? That's what dexterity is going to mean. Constitution is kind of how tough and how hardy you are. It's going to play into things like how much damage you can take and still keep fighting. How susceptible are you to diseases or poison, that sort of thing. So the higher your score, the tougher you are in that respect. Now, intelligence is, it has to do in-game with how much your character knows about their environment. How well are they able to figure things out? So, for example, you encounter some sort of a complicated mechanism in a dungeon, and you say, well, my character is going to try to figure it out. Now, you have to remember that you as a player, you don't have this thing in front of you, and you might well be playing a character that should be able to figure things like that out, whether or not you as a player would be able to. So that's where your intelligence score would come in, is you would use that to say, can my character figure out how to make this machine work? Wisdom, on the other hand, is more about how perceptive you are. How aware of your environment are you? Are you able to sense danger? Are you able to spot, hey, that stone in that wall looks like it doesn't belong there. Maybe it's a trigger for a secret door or something like that. Or, hey, do you guys smell goblins on the air? Like, those sorts of things are all wisdom scores, and they are related to essentially how aware of your environment you are, as opposed to intelligence, which is all about knowledge. And then last but not least of your main ability scores is charisma. And charisma is like force of personality. A lot of people would think of it as kind of how likable you are. And it's true that a lot of people who want to just talk their way out of everything, chatty, friendly people, might have a high charisma score. But, for example, R. Lee Ermey as a drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket is high charisma too, because he's scary, right? He's not trying to be your friend, but he is still using the force of his personality to have an effect on you, and that is also high charisma. So those are your main intelligence scores. So when we say an ability score, that's what we're talking about. But next we have to talk about ability modifiers. And don't worry, we'll go through all of this again when we are actually filling them out for our example character. But the modifier is something that is based on your score. So the score is always going to go from 1 to 20, 20 being the maximum for a normal character. There might be some games or mechanics where something might be allowed to go higher, but ordinarily 20 is the maximum. And so hypothetically, let's say we have a strength of 18, which is pretty high. The modifier, I should add, some people seem to put the main score in the main box and then the modifier in the oval, which is kind of what my instinct tells me. but you could also do it the reverse and put the main score in the below, because it's actually the modifier that you're going to use on a more regular basis. Now, the player's handbook has a little simple table to tell you what the modifier is for each score, but it's a pretty simple bit of math. What you're doing is you're taking your score and you're going to subtract 10, and then divide what you have left by 2 and round down. So for example, with 18, if we subtract 10, we get 8. We divide 8 in 2 and get 4, and we don't need to round for that. So with a strength of 18, your modifier is plus 4. And so that means that if I were to ask as a dungeon master you to do a skill check, to do a strength check, you're going to take a 20-sided die, and that's this guy here. You're going to roll that 20-sided die, and then whatever number it comes up on, you would add 4. And that is an element of, there's a degree of randomness, but you have better chances because you are a strong character. And so likewise, if we had a strength of 13, 13 minus 10 is 3. Divide 3 by 2 and it's 1.5. Round down, so that would be a modifier of plus 1. See? It's the reason that you add this onto your character sheet is so you don't have to do that math in your head every time, but you'll also get used to seeing these types of modifiers. And it can also work negative. For example, both 10 and 11 would be a plus 0, but let's say you end up with a character with a strength of 8. That's not very strong. You could think of, in context, a strength of 10 would be like average. That's an average strength person. So 8, maybe this person's a little bit scrawny. They're not as strong as the average person. And so still, you subtract 10 from 8, and it's minus 2. Divided by 2, minus 1. So your modifier would be, minus 1. And that way, if I were to ask you to make a strength check, what you would do is you'd roll your d20 and then subtract 1. See? And so that's going to apply for all of these ability scores. So I kind of got off track there. So strength is going to play into your weapon attacks, as I said. Dexterity is going to play into your armor class and your initiative, and that's basically how fast you move. How hard to hit are you? Constitution is going to play into how many hit points you have, which is essentially how much damage you can take. Intelligence has a lot of factors, but it's going to play into any time your character sees this mysterious machine and says, can my character figure out how to make it work? I might ask you to do an intelligence check. And so you would roll the d20, and then you would add or subtract your intelligence modifier, whatever you've calculated it to be. And that's what we would mean by an intelligence check. Then likewise, wisdom has to do with how aware of your environment you are. So for example, there's passive wisdom, passive perception, and that would do like it's a score that tells you basically how easy to surprise are you. If someone's trying to sneak up on you, how good are you at finding them out. And then charisma is going to play into, like, if you want to talk a bad guy to try to convince him the error of his ways and convince him not to try to kill you to let you go, that might be a perception check. Or if you are you've just got caught stealing a book from a noble and you want to try to convince him that you were only just borrowing it and it's only because you really respect this particular noble and you were impressed by him and you just wanted to be more like him, and you might make a deception check, and that would also be based on charisma. But those get into skills, which we're going to talk about, I guess, right now. So you can see each of these skills. Let me zoom that in a little bit more. Each of these has an abbreviation by it to talk about which of the main ability scores it is linked to. So, for example, acrobatics. That would be if you're trying to, climb up a rope really fast, or you're trying to leap over a pit, or you're trying to, catch something that's falling, or acrobatics. And so that would be a dexterity check. And so normally your dexterity modifier, whatever you were getting it from here, let's say your dexterity modifier is +2, then you would put +2 right here. And so that means if I asked you to do an acrobatics check, just like if it was a dexterity check, you would say acrobatics, roll d20, and then add your +2. Now, this applies to all of these different ones. So acrobatics, I'm not going to necessarily go into the detail of what each one is right now, but each of them has sort of a different use in the game, and some may be more useful than others. But let's also briefly talk about proficiency. Proficiency means that even beyond what your ability scores are, your character is kind of extra good at this specific thing. So let's say you are a high charisma character and you say you're proficient in deception. You would click this little radio button here to say you're proficient, and then you have a proficiency bonus. At level 1, which we're making a level 1 character, your proficiency bonus is always going to be +2. So we'll go ahead and just fill that in right now. And so if you are proficient at deception, then you would take your normal charisma modifier and add your +2 proficiency bonus. Now, this is all going to be a little confusing. Hopefully it'll be more clear when we actually go through it with a character. So we're still just talking about the basic terminology, and then we'll walk through the process, and hopefully it'll be even more clear then. So that's what it means to be proficient in a skill. And you can also be proficient in other things beyond what's listed here, and we have a box down here that is for that purpose to say, oh, you also have proficiency with an herbalism kit, or with thieves' tools, or what languages can you speak, and those sorts of things would go into this box. Now, a lot of these sorts of proficiencies are going to come along with what race and class and background you pick. It'll tell you which ones you might automatically have, or give you a few to choose from. All right, so now let's just briefly talk about saving throws. Saving throws is someone has done something to you, and now you need to try to save yourself from it. So, for example, someone has thrown a big rock at your character, and you want your character to be strong enough to kind of catch it without it hurting you. That might be a strength saving throw. And so just like with the skills, you have your strength modifier from up here would go down here, but it might be that your class is proficient in strength saving throws. So in that case, you would put your strength modifier plus your proficiency bonus, and that's what goes here. And so that's going to be saving throws. And then various spells and magical effects and poisons and so on will require different types of saving throws depending on how they work. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit now about armor class, initiative, and speed. Speed is usually tied to the race of character that you choose, and it's just simply how fast can they walk or run. And then there are going to be different abilities and spells and so on that could increase that, or if your character has been wounded, it might decrease their speed. But the number that's going to go here is most useful in terms of just saying, well, are you going to be able to outrun somebody? Or if you're using a battle map, it might tell you how many squares can you move in a single turn. Initiative is kind of how ready to go are you. And you're going to have an initiative modifier is what's going to go here. And your initiative modifier is going to be the same as your dexterity modifier. because it's essentially how quick can you get ready. And you might also have other effects that could impact your initiative modifier. Then armor class is also based... yes, armor class is also based on your dexterity modifier, because it's how hard are you to hit. So the higher your armor class, the harder it is to hit you. Now, what also has an impact on that is your armor. If you are a slow-moving character, but you're wearing thick, heavy plate armor, that would also give you a higher armor class. But the short version is that your armor class, the higher it is, the harder you are to hit, less likely you are to take damage. And then initiative, the higher your initiative is, the more likely you are to get to go first in combat, or to go earlier in the lineup. Then hit points. You're going to have a hit point maximum based on a number of factors. It's based on level, and it's also based on your constitution score. You're going to have an amount of hit points to start with at level 1, and then you'll get more every time you level up. And then current hit points is a separate box, because you can have list your maximum here, and then in current, if you've taken some damage, you can add your new value here so that you track how much you have left. Temporary hit points is something you don't have to worry with when you're setting up a character, because it only has to do with certain types of spells can give you temporary hit points, and that's what would go there if you get some. Hit dice is also something we'll talk a little bit more about when we're actually setting up the character, because it depends on which class you're doing. But the short version of what hit dice are for is they determine how many more, how much hit points can you regain when you rest, is the basic way that those are used. So if you've taken a little damage but now you rest up a little bit, how many hit points can you get back? That's what hit dice are used for. Death saves, again, are not something that you need during character creation, but the way it works in combat is that if you ever lose all your hit points, you are unconscious and have to start making death saves. You roll a d20, and if you get higher than 10, or 10 or higher, success. Otherwise, if you get below 10, a failure. And then you do that every time it would be your turn, but you're still unconscious, you roll again. And if you get to 3 successes, then you are stabilized. So you're still unconscious, you still need to be healed, but you're not going to die. If, on the other hand, you get to 3 failures, that means your character has died. That might not happen, but it might. All right. Now this, some of this stuff we'll leave blank for now as well, because it's going to come into play. But basically, this in here is where you're going to describe the main attacks that you use for the most time. So if you're using a lot of weapons, you would describe what it does here. You'd say, what is it? What is the attack? And then the attack bonus is essentially how likely are you to have it hit. And we'll talk about how that gets figured out when we're filling out the actual character. And then how much damage does it do if it does hit. And then you can have additional descriptions here. This box is for equipment. You just describe the stuff that your character is carrying. This is for money: copper pieces, silver, electrum, gold, and platinum. Features and traits is kind of a generic box. That's where you're going to put things like, does your character have dark vision that allows them to see in the dark, for example? Do they have a special racial capability that lets them cast a certain spell once per day? Maybe. And you would put all of those sorts of little miscellaneous details there. Then, personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. We'll get to that when we start talking about personality of your character. But the short version is, personality traits is like, what's something that other people would notice about your character? Are they really fidgety? Do they seem really confident all the time? Maybe a little bit cold? Are they scary? Are they funny? Those types of things. Things that other people would notice. Ideals is like, what do they think is important in the abstract? Like, do they think it's important to always be honest? Do they think that charity and sharing what you have is the highest ideal to strive for? Bond would be something in the world that's important to them. Is it their family? Is it their hometown? Is it this one sentimental locket that they just can't live without? And then a flaw would be, you know, some personality flaw. Like they kind of are a pathological liar. They can't help themselves. Or they tend to be too greedy, or those sorts of things. All right, so let's look at the next 2 pages, which won't take as long as this first one. And then we will start actually creating a character. So, second page, you see I have another spot for a character name. And this is where you can have age, height, weight, eyes, skin, hair. So those are physical description elements. And now things like age, height, weight, and even some of the coloring, you might get ideas for that based on what type of racial character you've picked. And so, for example, if you have a human, but it's a human who has a very strong, you know, very high strength ability score, they might be a little beefier, you know, might be a little taller, might be a little heavier than someone who is skinny but has high intelligence and dexterity, for example. And then coloring. Now, the book also has ideas and little tables to help you decide what the height and weight should be, and it also gives you ranges depending on which race you've chosen to tell you what is the what do the ages mean. So, for example, elves, which live a long, long time, you could have an elf be 120 years old, but that's still relatively young for an elf. Whereas for a human, they would be ancient at that age. And then likewise, character appearance is a spot where you can actually add a picture if you have one. Allies and organizations is something you're not likely to have when you create an initial character, but maybe if part of your background is that your character was an acolyte at a temple, you might include that here to say that, you know, if you went back to that temple, they would be your buddies. Additional features and traits is just for more miscellaneous stuff. Treasure is for basically items that you've picked up during your adventures that you may be planning to sell rather than adding to your standard equipment list here. And then character backstory is, you know, whatever you want it to be. As you've solidified your character, you can put it all there. And this third page is only going to be used if you have a character that casts spells. So there's the spellcasting class, which will be, for example, different classes use different. So like if you're a wizard, you would put wizard here. If you're a warlock, you'd put warlock. If you're a bard, you put bard, etc. Spellcasting ability is different depending on the class because bards use their charisma, for example, to cast spells, whereas a wizard uses intelligence. So that's what you would put there depending on what class you've chosen. Spell save DC is tied to your spell ability modifier and your proficiency. And so you calculate that once you have all of those other scores. And same for spell attack bonus. Spell attack bonus basically means if you are doing a spell that like sends out a sort of magical attack, how likely is that attack to hit? That would go in spell attack bonus. Whereas spell save DC is if you have a spell that sort of automatically hits, you know, you're not like throwing a ball, it is mystical trance and it hits automatically, but how easy is it or how difficult is it for the target to shake off the effect is the spell save DC. So then the rest of this list, you start with cantrips, could be called level 0. Cantrips are spells that you just have them memorized essentially. You can just do those, you could do them in your sleep, you could do them backwards and on command. So you can use them as many times as you want, once per turn, and you never run out. But they're going to be lower level spells. And then as you get into higher level spells, based on your class and various other things, you're going to have a total number of spell slots of each level. And as you level up, you'll get more and more, but generally most classes all start only with level 1 spells. And so you would say, how many first level spell slots do you have based on your class? And you would put that right here. And then as you use them, you would say, how many have you used? And so then the spells, you can list all the different spells that you know, and then you have a little button to say, are they a prepared spell or not? Now, some of this you will do it a little bit differently depending on what class you pick, because the different classes have different ways that they handle which spells you know and which spells you have prepared. For example, a druid knows all their spells, but they only have a certain subset of those that they have ready to cast at any time. And so for them, what they would do is you're not going to have room to list all the possible spells that could go here. So what you might list is only which ones you have prepared for that day. And so I'm not going to go into all the different options that every single class could do with that, because that would take too long. But the short version is that whatever your source material, whether it's the player's handbook or any other source, should tell you how your class prepares spells, how many do they know, and then we'll do an example. So we'll create a character and deal with that. So that is the character sheet. So now let's create a character. Why don't we? I'm thinking. Okay, one of the other things that I'm briefly going to cover is just a super high level description of what are the races and classes available within the primary guidebook, player's handbook. I'm not going to go into detail. There's a lot more material available for all of these choices. So we have for the races, let's start with the character's race. There's dwarves, elves, humans, halflings. And halflings are like hobbits. So if you want to imagine Lord of the Rings, you're pretty close there. The way those different races are portrayed, you're not going to be far off imagining them that way. Elves are longer lived. They tend to be more slender, more agile, more elegant. Dwarves are shorter, hardier, stockier. Halflings are much smaller. They might tend to be good-natured, that sort of thing. There's a lot of variation and subclasses available as well, but those are the basic ideas. Then you get dragonborn, who are basically humanoid dragons who have dragon blood in their heritage. And they are, reptilian-looking people, and they have a breath weapon, for example. You have gnomes, who are a little bit like they're a little bit like the elf version of halflings. They're a little bit more slender, but they're also small, like halflings are. You have half-elves, who have some of the same qualities of humans and elves, and they're kind of in between there. You have half-orcs, who are a little tougher than a regular human, but also might tend to have some anger issues in them. And then you have tieflings, who are like human demon hybrids. So they're humanoid in shape, but they also have horns and maybe dark, like black or bright red skin and a thick tail and that sort of thing. So depending on what setting your game is going to take place in, all of those different races might take on additional meanings. For example, your game might be in a location where tieflings, despite their strange appearance, are totally accepted as completely normal. Or you might be in a place where people would see one and run screaming because they think that they're demonic and evil. So there are also lots of other race options in other sources, but we're going to stick with the ones that are listed in the main handbook right now. But each of those also sometimes has their own sort of subcategory. So let's pick one. I think I'm going to pick a gnome. Let's do a gnome for our character here. And so if we start, we're going to be a gnome. But according to the handbook, there are a couple of different kinds of gnomes. So let me flip to the appropriate section here. All right, so gnomes, there's more than one type within the book here. We could be a forest gnome or a rock gnome. And a rock gnome might be more inclined to be living in caves. They're more interested in like tinkering with machinery and clockworks, for example. And then forest gnomes live out in the forest in the wilderness, and they're more inclined to have an affinity with animals and maybe illusion magic. So I'm going to pick a rock gnome. Now, when you're choosing a race in Dungeons and Dragons, there are a number of things to know about it. One is that you're going to have an ability score increase or decrease based on that race. So gnomes automatically have an intelligence increase of +2. But we don't know what our score is yet. So right now I'm writing +2 just to remind us to add 2 to whatever we get later. And then you also, as a rock gnome, get a constitution increase of +1 because they're a little tougher, they're a little hardier. Now, age. Gnomes, it says, gnomes mature at the same rate humans do, and most are expected to settle down into an adult life around age 40, but they live from 350 to 500 years. So we'll take that into account when we start deciding some of these other things about our character. Alignment. Now, you can make any alignment you want, but gnomes are most often good. And that's what, the book's source material says. And so we're probably going to be a good character. That would be the upbringing anyway. Now, size. Size shows up. Oh, you know what? I'm not sure there's actually a spot for writing the size. I mean, we get height and weight here. But size, all creatures in Dungeons and Dragons have a size category. And humans are medium, to just give an example. And then both halflings and gnomes are small, which means they're about half the size of a human. So gnomes are small. Speed. And speed, they're a little smaller. So they walk, they go 25 feet per turn, and so that's a speed of 25. Now, gnomes have dark vision, which means we can put dark vision here. And according to the book, what that means is that they can see in dim light just as well as they could see so in dim light, they can see up to 60 feet away just as well as if it were brightly lit. And if it was total darkness, they can still see in kind of black and white. So I have dark vision as a gnome. And then I also get what it calls gnome cunning. And gnome cunning says advantage on all intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws against magic. Now, I'm not going to just remember all of that necessarily, so I'm going to type it here. Advantage on saving throws for intelligence, against magic. Now, advantage means that if I was asked by the dungeon master to make an intelligence saving throw, I get to roll the d20 twice and pick the higher one. That's what advantage means. Now, if I was at a disadvantage for something, it means you roll twice and pick the lower one. So, as a gnome, it says that I speak, I can speak, read, and write Common and Gnomish. Common is basically a language that almost everybody speaks. And then Gnomish. And I put that here in others' proficiencies and languages. All right. Okay, I hope this is interesting. Okay, I lost my train of thought here. All right. And then subrace is rock or forest. And so I look to the rock gnome stuff, and that's where I've got my constitution +1. And I also get artificer's lore. And whenever you make an intelligence history check related to magic items, alchemical objects, or technological devices, you can add twice your proficiency bonus instead of the normal proficiency bonus. And so what that means is my proficiency bonus for level 1 is +2. So because of Artificer's Lore, if I'm making a history check, I have experience with those types of things, and so I could add +4 to that instead of just +2. Add double proficiency to history checks related to magic items, alchemical objects, and tech devices. All right. Now, the last but not least from Rock Gnome is they have an ability called Tinker. And what that does is I have proficiency with artisan's tools, so I can put that here. Artisans. And what those would allow me to do is that if I wanted to use my tools to make something, I get to add my proficiency bonus to the check. And then using these tools, I can spend 1 hour and 10 gold pieces worth of materials to create a tiny clockwork device. And there are 3 options here. Now there's enough text in this that probably instead of adding it all to this box, I might make like a separate index card to add it, or add the extra details in the back here. I'm not going to add all of it right now, but what I'm going to say is 1 hour, 10 GP materials to make small clockwork device. And it gives examples of what they could be. It could be like a little clockwork toy of an animal. It could be a fire starter. It could be a music box. And then once you have one of those things, you can have up to 3 of them at a time, and you can either use them yourself or you could potentially sell them as like an activity to make money. All right, so that is our race. Now let's talk about class. The classes available in the main game. There's barbarians who are all about, getting in there and fighting. They have barbarian rage, so they're jumping in there and just getting in the thick of battle. You have a bard who's like a musician or an entertainer, and they can do lots of cool stuff too. Like they can be good at fighting, and they do lots of support magic, but they can do all sorts of things. One thing that's important to remember is that there's customization options for all of these classes that can give you pretty flexible opportunities to play in different ways with each type of class. But you're generally going to choose a class based on the basic things that you want to do. So a bard does like a lot of support magic, and can do some fighting too, but also like giving inspiration and other enhancements to your fellow players. A cleric is like a priest who has holy magic from the god they serve. And one of the things that's related to that is that when you start thinking about role-playing that character, you have to imagine, well, who is this god? What sorts of things does that god like? Do you, as a player, need to play your character in a way that that god would approve of? And that doesn't mean like outside the game. It just means that in context of the game, if your character started doing things that that god wouldn't like, that god might be unhappy with them and take some of their power away. A druid is can do some fighting too, but they have a lot of nature-based magic, and they can also change into animal forms. There's fighters who are pretty straightforward, and they can do lots of cool stuff, but mostly their deal is going in and hitting stuff with weapons, or, you could have ranged weapons too, but, fighting's their deal, not so much magic. There's monks who are also tend to be like fighters in the sense that they're kind of in the thick of it, mixing things up, but they tend to do more like unarmed combat and martial arts type things, and they can also have magic related to that. You have a paladin whose magic comes from a sacred vow that they've made, and there's different kinds of vows they can make, and they get different abilities for them. But so they are really good at fighting, but also they can use some magic. You have a ranger who's kind of an expert in the wilderness, and they really know what they're doing out there. They can, they know the lay of the land. They're good at tracking. They're good at hunting, that sort of thing. You have a rogue who's kind of the sneaky one who wants to creep around in the shadows and then stab the enemy in the back, picking locks and that sort of thing. You have a sorcerer. These last three are all kind of related in the sense that you'd think of them as like a magic user, but they're slightly different flavors. So a sorcerer has kind of wild magic inherent to them, and they're kind of drawing it from themselves, and it's a little bit out of control, but they can also tweak the spells a little bit. You have a warlock who gets their power from having made a pact with some incredibly powerful entity. And then you have a wizard who gets all of their magic from hard work and study and understanding of the magic. And so they have like a spell book where they have the most spells available to them, but they also have to learn the spells. So those are the class choices, and I think I might want to try a ranger. I've not built a ranger before. So let's build a rock gnome ranger. That sounds fun. A rock gnome ranger. All right. So I'm flipping in the book to the section for a ranger. So the ranger. We start with a couple of different things. First, hit points. They get 1 d10 hit dice. So remember we talked about hit dice? So we start with 1 d10. And then we have 1 d10 to start with. And so what that means is that if I had taken some damage in battle, and then we were taking a short rest, and I wanted to heal myself a little bit, I would roll a d10, which looks like this, and I would get however many hit points back. But I can only use that once, and then I would have to do a long rest to get those back. But then as you level up, you get more hit dice. You can do that more often. But so now we want hit points at first level for a ranger is 10 plus your constitution modifier. You know what? I'm getting ahead of ourselves. Now it is time to actually assign our ability scores. And there's a number of ways to do that. And I think for expediency's purposes, there are ways to do it where you're literally rolling the dice in order to find out what your scores are. But then there's also what they call a standard array. And let me find where it has that. Standard array. So what that means is that it's 6 numbers, and they are 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8, which means that I put those in whichever abilities I want. But I'm going to have one that's relatively high with that 15, and I'm going to have one that's relatively low with that 8, and then kind of all in the middle. And then after we assign those numbers in those spots, we'll add these extra modifiers for being a gnome. So let's look at what it recommends for rangers. Rangers Rangers do a lot of their stuff with dexterity. And according to the book, it says that dexterity should be the highest score, followed by wisdom. All right, so that means that we take our 15 here, and wisdom would be 14. So we've got our 15 and our 14 assigned. And it's also worth noting that the constitution and intelligence modifiers we get for being a rock gnome don't stack with those highest scores. And what that means is that it's going to be a little more well-rounded character. The more even your ability scores are, the more kind of well-rounded you are. You're good at lots of different things, but you're not necessarily a specialist or an expert in specific things. So let's make intelligence that 13, and so then because we've got a +2, that becomes a 15. Actually, you know what? I take that back. Because we have that +2 to go there, we don't have to use the 13 for that. So let's make strength the 13. The 13 here, and then let's put the 12 here. 12 and then +1, so that makes this 11. And then the 10 +2, that makes that one a 12 as well. And then charisma is where we're left over, and that's an 8. So when we look at these scores, dexterity is the highest. We're pretty fast, pretty agile. Wisdom, we're pretty perceptive. We can see what's going on around us. Strength and intelligence, yeah, we're up there, a little better than average. And then constitution, yeah, even still a little better than average. But charisma less than 10, what that means is that maybe this character is a little bit socially awkward. They're maybe shy. They're not necessarily very impressive in conversation. And you can play all of that into, once you start deciding to roleplay your character, you can decide how to incorporate that into your character's personality. Okay, so now that we've got these scores assigned, let's do our modifiers. So 13, so 10, 13 minus 10 is 3, divided by 2, 1.5, round down, that's a +1. 15 minus 10, 5, divided in half, 2.5, round down, that's a +2. It should be noted that the even numbers are where you get the increase to your modifier. Constitution is going to be a +0. Intelligence is going to be a +1. 12 minus 10 is 2. Divided by 2 is 1. 14 is going to be a +2. Yes, +2. So you can see 14 and 15 are both +2. And then if we were to get 16, that would be a +3. And then 8 minus 10 is -2 divided by 2. So that's going to be a -1. So what that means is that if someone asked me to do a charisma check, I would take the D20, roll it, and let's say I get an 11. I would subtract 1, so my result of my check would be 10. Now, because we have that, we can go through and add our base scores here. And again, strength is just going to come straight from the strength modifier. And then dexterity and so on. but we're going to add proficiencies. Actually, let's not fill these out yet because we're going to add the proficiencies. So, so as a ranger, what are we proficient in? Well, we already know artisan's tools from being a rock gnome, but rangers are also proficient in light armor, medium armor, and shields. And then we also have simple weapons, martial weapons. And we'll talk more about that when we get to equipment. But simple weapons, you can imagine, is anything that is not too complicated. You know, it's like it's straightforward how it works. Whereas martial weapons, you imagine someone would need a little more training to really be able to use it effectively. And then light armor, you could imagine, is just like being, like just padding or leather, light, very like cheap hides, that sort of thing. Whereas like a good piece of leather armor would be a medium armor. So, no additional tools proficient from being a ranger. But saving throws. Rangers are proficient in saving throws for strength and dexterity. So that means for strength saving throw, my strength would be +1, but because I add my proficiency bonus, it's +3. Dexterity would be +2, but because I add my proficiency bonus, it's +4. Let me zoom in a little bit. Constitution would be +0, and it is because I'm not proficient. So intelligence, +1. Wisdom, +2. And then charisma, -1. We're going to do the skills a little bit like that later when we get there. Now, equipment that the gnome, or excuse me, that the ranger starts with, we get a choice of either scale mail or leather armor, and those are two types of medium armor. And scale mail, I believe, it's tougher, but it gives you a disadvantage to stealth checks because it kind of clanks around. Oh, excuse me, leather armor is light armor. And so light armor, in this case, I can choose, do I want leather armor where I'm able to be a little stealthier? Or do I want scale mail, which makes me a little tougher, but I kind of make more noise when I'm moving around? I think I want to be leather armor. And you know what? We'll go ahead and do this here. So according to the handbook, leather armor means that your armor class, again, this is how hard you are to hit, and if someone's attacking you, how hard is it for them to hurt you? So the leather armor armor class is 11 plus the dexterity modifier. And so my dexterity modifier is +2. So 11 plus 2 is, and I'm proficient in it. Yes. Now I'm suddenly feeling like, so 11 plus 2 is 13. And then I'm suddenly blanking on whether proficiency works with the armor or not. Armor proficiency. Okay, here it is. It's all in the book. Anyone can put on a suit of armor or strap a shield to an arm. Only those proficient in the armor's use know how to wear it effectively, however. Your class gives you proficiency with certain types of armor. If you wear armor that you lack proficiency with, you have disadvantage on any ability check, saving throw, or attack roll that involves strength or dexterity, and you can't cast spells. So I don't add my +2 proficiency bonus, but it means that if I tried to wear heavier armor that I wasn't proficient in, it would really slow me down. I wouldn't be able to move around so much. So what else do I get as starting equipment? Well, I can pick either 2 short swords or 2 simple melee weapons. And I'm thinking, do I want short swords? What do I imagine myself when I start to sketch in the outlines of what this character is like? What do they want? You know, like, are they got the badass dual swords, or maybe if we have 2 other simple weapons. Simple weapons include things like daggers, hand axes, javelins, mace, a sickle, or a spear. And I think what sounds kind of fun is if I have, let's see, I'm looking at a mace and a spear. That seems kind of fun. So I'll just start there. Mace and a spear. So a mace is like, you know, it's going to do bludgeoning damage, and we'll work out the attacks for this in a moment. And then the spear can either be used to jab or it can be thrown. You could also, it's versatile, so you can use it either just in one hand or in 2 hands. And what else we get? So according to the book, we get a longbow and a quiver of 20 arrows. All right, and a longbow, according to the book, is classified as a martial weapon. It is a martial ranged weapon, which is okay because I am proficient in martial weapons. And then I get either a Dungeoneer's pack or an Explorer's pack. And those, the book will go into the details of what goes into each. But the short version is that the Dungeoneer's pack is a little bit more well-suited to doing stuff underground. And so let's look at what that all includes. Flip into the... Okay, so a Dungeoneer's pack includes backpack, crowbar, hammer, pitons, torches, tinderbox, rations and water skin, and some rope. Whereas an Explorer's pack, what's different is that it has a mess kit. It doesn't have the pitons or the hammer and the crowbar. And that seems to be the big difference. But it has a mess kit and a bit more of that. I'm thinking this character as a rock gnome. I'm kind of imagining right now that they're a little bit more used to doing stuff underground. So I'm going to give them a Dungeoneer's pack. Now, it would be on me as the owner of this character to know what that includes, but I'm just going to write that here for now. So that's the equipment. Now, there's some additional decisions that I have to make as a ranger. Now, some of these decisions will come more into play at a higher level. For example, I don't pick any spells as a level 1 ranger. I don't start getting spells until level 2 as a ranger. And just to kind of show how that works, we'll pick spells as though we're level 2 at the end. But in the meantime, only looking at the level 1 options. So, beginning at first level as a ranger, I have a favored enemy. And I have some specific kind of creature that I'm just extra good at tracking and fighting. And so there's a number of different things to choose from. And just aberrations, beasts, celestials, constructs, dragons, elementals, fae, fiends, giants, monstrosities, oozes, plants, or undead. I like... you know what? Let's... it says you can choose 2 races of humanoid, such as gnolls and orcs, as favored enemies. I'm going to go and decide that they are that goblins and orcs are my type of ranger's favorite enemy. And what that means, having them as my favorite enemy, is that when I'm trying to track them, if I'm doing a wisdom survival check, right here, if I'm trying to track them, I get advantage if I'm tracking those. And if I'm trying to remember details about how they, what goblins and orcs are like, and I'm doing an intelligence check to see how much I know about them, I have advantage on those as well. And I also learn one language of my choice if it is spoken by my favorite enemies. So I now speak Goblin. And then if I get to level 6, I can choose an additional favorite enemy. And so let's add here what that means is advantage to survive. So to tracking and intelligence checks. All right. So as a first level ranger, I also choose natural explorer. I am particularly familiar with one type of natural environment and are adept at traveling and surviving in such regions. And one of those regions, a lot of them are standard, you know, like coast, desert, forest, and so on. But one of them is the Underdark. And as I've started to imagine this sort of underground goblin hunter, I'm thinking Underdark is my favorite territory. My character's done a lot of spent a lot of time navigating the Underdark. Favored terrain. Underdark. And what that means is that while traveling for an hour or more in favored terrain, you gain the following benefits. Difficult terrain does not slow the group's travel because my character is adept at, like, oh, here's the best way to climb up that wall, or here's the best way to not get, whoops, my phone's ringing. I don't know who that was. Okay, and so that's additional, sorry, I'm distracted. But all right. Even when you can't get lost except by magical means, even when you're engaged in another activity while traveling, you remain alert to danger. Can't be surprised as well. You can move stealthily faster than you would otherwise. You can forage for food and find twice as much as you would otherwise. And you're better at tracking things. And so I'm not going to write all of that down here. But basically what it means is that my character just really knows their way around the Underdark and is going to be good at, you know, taking care of business down there. So we don't choose it yet because we're only making a level 1 character, but it's always good to kind of look ahead at the choices you're going to make in your next couple of levels. So without getting too into it, one of the things that I would make at a level 2 is I would choose a fighting style. And so that means if I could be an expert in archery or defense or dueling, which means I would have just like one weapon in one hand, but I'm extra good with it, or 2-weapon fighting where I'm an expert at using both weapons, one in each hand. And that might be what I would choose because I kind of like my mace spear deal. And then also at level 2, I would start being able to cast spells. And so let's just for a moment look at what the spells, how the spells would all work when I become level 2. So as the level 1 ranger, I wouldn't have them yet, but just so I can show you how the spell list and all of those things work, we'll give that as an example. We'll do it here. So spell slots. As a level 2 ranger, I will have 2 level 1 spell slots. And I will know 2 spells. So what that means is that I will turn to the ranger spell list, and let's see. And I know 2 of them. So I'll look at the list and decide which ones that I want. And I choose 2 from that list. And then because I have 2 spell slots, it means that I could cast each of those spells once or one of them twice in any combination. And then in order to replenish those expended spell slots, I would have to do a long rest, which is like a full night's sleep. So, for example, and let's see. Okay. And then when I level up each time, if I decide that one of these spells that I know, I don't really like it, and I want to change it to another one, when I go from level 2 to level 3, in addition to learning one additional spell, I can swap out one of the ones that I have. But you can't just do that willy-nilly. You can only do it when you level up as a ranger, as opposed to, say, a druid who can switch them anytime they do a long rest. So, if I look at the spell list, there's a lot to choose from. But if I look for the ranger spells, the first level spells include a number of different things like alarm, animal friendship, cure wounds, detect magic, detect poison and disease, ensnaring strike, fog cloud, goodberry, hail of thorns, hunter's mark, jump, longstrider, and speak with animals. Well, I'm thinking, if I'm starting to imagine this sort of underground explorer type character and this sort of maybe slightly awkward but good at hunting sort of thing, hunter's mark. I'm going to decide that I know hunter's mark, and I would write it here, mark. And then maybe I also detect magic. I'm good at detecting magic. And the book tells you specifically what each of those does in a specific way. For example, hunter's mark allows me, when we're in combat, I can sort of pick on one character, one enemy monster, and say, oh, that's the one that I've got my eye on. And as long as I'm attacking that creature, I can do extra damage to it. And then likewise, detect magic would help me to tell, hey, you know what? That little bowl of water sitting on a pedestal in the middle of the room, is that just regular water, or is there something magic going on there? The detect magic spell would help me to determine what it is and maybe what kind of magic is on it. So if, and so again, this is what we would do at level 2. Spell casting ability. So let's look at how that works. For a ranger, spell casting ability is wisdom, meaning the higher my wisdom is, the better I am at my spells. And the spell save DC says it's 8 plus the proficiency bonus plus my wisdom modifier. So if we look back up and say, what was my wisdom modifier? Plus 2. So 8 plus my proficiency bonus, which is plus 2, plus my wisdom modifier plus 2, means that my spell save DC is 12. 8 plus 2 plus 2. And then the spell attack modifier is proficiency bonus and the wisdom modifier. So it's basically just, it's the 8. It's without the 8. So this is plus 4. Now, what that means, neither of these spells that I've chosen are especially linked to those traits about it, but it's kind of like I said. The spell save DC means that if I were, for example, going to try to charm someone and make them more likely to be friendly to me, how likely are they to be able to tell that that's what's happening? Well, the higher my spell save DC is, the harder it will be for them to shake off the effect. Likewise, if I was trying to use something that magically shoots a fireball at them, maybe I have to aim it this would be how likely it is to hit. So then, as I would continue to level up, I would also choose a ranger archetype, which can have a number of different things. And we're not going to get into that now because it starts getting more complicated and we get all of that involved. But like I said, it's always handy to maybe have a general idea of what you might want to be picking. So the different ranger archetypes, there's hunter, which basically makes them extra good at fighting specific kinds of monsters. Or you can be a beastmaster, which means you get like an animal companion like you. Like maybe you have like a bear or some other sort of a creature that's like your pet and they can attack for you. So I don't have to make that decision right now, so I can kind of just think about that and keep that in mind if I play my character and decide in the future if which of those would my character choose. And so, like I said, we're gonna leave these here, but we remember that they only technically count until level 2. All right, so we have chosen our race. We've chosen our class. And how's this going? All right, trying to look back at my notes. Okay, now, personality and background. So, there's many different backgrounds to choose from and in the handbook. Now, you don't have to use any of the ones that they have, but depending on which ones you do, hang on, I'm just remembering if there's anything else here. Oh, I'm glad I looked back because I almost forgot that also being a ranger, I get to choose 3 proficiency skills from a list including animal handling, athletics, insight, investigation, nature, perception, stealth, and survival. So I can pick 3 of those and be proficient in them. So I'm thinking if this character has spent a lot of time maybe alone underground, exploring dangerous areas, maybe both stealth and survival are important for that character. And then if I want to say, I'm imagining them maybe like, I'm suddenly imagining them with a little bit of a like mystery solving slant to them that just sort of kind of strikes me as appealing. So I'm going to do investigation, which is basically a matter of trying to figure out, like you come across a scene where there's a bunch of corpses and you want to say, what happened here? Or you're trying to say, figuring out something based on checking it out. So I'm going to have those be the 3 that I get for being a ranger. And now, backgrounds. The reason that they have these different types of backgrounds are basically just a way to kind of inspire you to imagine certain things, and they do that by getting a different feature and a different bonus, different sorts of advantages to choosing one or the other. But the background is a perfect example of something where you might work to customize something on your own to help you with the character. But I'll just go ahead and pick one of the ones that's in here. And already, given how this character's starting to shape up, I kind of have in mind that even though there's lots of good ones, there's like charlatan, criminal, acolyte, sage, hermit, noble. But the one that I already kind of had in mind a little bit is outlander. You grew up in the wilds, far from civilization and the comforts of town and technology. And that's kind of the idea there. Oh, but I see that as an outlander, what that would give me is proficiencies in athletics and survival. But survival is one of the ones that I checked already here. But remember, survival I just picked from the list. So if I'm going to be proficient in survival and athletics for being an outlander, then I can go back and I can pick a different one for being a ranger. So if I already have survival for being a ranger, then instead, let me look back at the ranger list. Maybe nature. So there we go. So now, as a ranger, I've chosen nature, investigation, and stealth, and then being an outlander gives me athletics and survival. And it also makes me proficient in one musical instrument. What sort of a musical instrument would this character play? I'm imagining... Sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking. You know what? I'm imagining something a little bit more gentle and wistful. So maybe a flute. So, and then I get to learn one additional language of my choice. And I'm going to choose Dwarvish. So my character also speaks Dwarvish. And so this is coming from the Outlander background, which I can also add up here. And we can also, we're going to be a ranger, level 1. My name here. Okay. So, and then also, as part of my Outlander equipment, I get a staff, which I could potentially also use for fighting. Hunting trap. A trophy from an animal. And then as a role-playing opportunity for flavor, I might decide what kind of trophy is this. Well, let's see. Maybe something that would be a trophy of a great kill, maybe an underground creature. And since I have a lower charisma character, maybe something that's, you can understand how that would be a little off-putting to someone. So it's maybe it's a necklace from giant spider mandibles. And then traveler's clothes and a pouch containing 10 gold pieces. So that's what I get for being an Outlander. And there's also a feature that says, Wanderer, you have excellent memory for maps and geography, and you can always recall the general layout of terrain, settlements, and other features around you. In addition, you can find food and fresh water for yourself and up to 5 other people each day, provided that the land offers berries, small games, water, and such forth. So that would be another thing to add here in feature. Wanderer. Excellent. Can't type. Memory for maps and geography. And expert at foraging. All right. And so now it has some suggested personality types. And it has some tables where you could just literally roll dice and have it come up with some randomly. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to look at the choices and pick which one I think fits the best for what I'm imagining here. So we have origin. And some of the choices it has is like forester, trapper, homesteader, guide, exile or outcast, bounty hunter, pilgrim, tribal nomad, hunter-gatherer, tribal marauder. Well, I'm thinking this character that we're building feels like they have kind of an exile or outcast flavor to them. Am I wrong? So maybe they did something to get them kicked out of their rock gnome community, and that's why they've spent so much time by themselves. So we'll keep that in mind as we start, building our character and imagining the backstory. So personality trait, we have a table of a number of different options, and they include things like, I'm driven by a wanderlust that led me away from home, or I have a lesson for every situation drawn from observing nature. One of them is, I was, in fact, raised by wolves. Let's see. One of them is, I place no stock in wealthy or well-mannered folk. Money and manners won't save you from a hungry owlbear. And, so that's a good one. I could maybe do that. Then there's also just, I feel far more comfortable around animals than people. Or, I'm always picking things up, absently fiddling with them, and sometimes accidentally breaking them. That feels like, I like that one. That can tie into maybe a little bit of that social awkwardness, is that they're just very sort of fidgety. Always fidgeting, sometimes breaking. And so that would be something to keep in mind as I play, that like if we walk into a room where like some of the rest of the party is talking to someone and I just see a bunch of knickknacks, maybe I just sort of casually pick one up and just start playing with it. Ideals, and it has a couple here to choose from, is like, life is like the seasons in constant change and we must change with it. Greater good, it is each person's responsibility to make the most happiness for the whole tribe. Honor, might, nature, glory. And I feel like change seems good for this, which is, life is like the seasons in constant change and we must change with it. I like that. And it also suggests that that's sort of a chaotic ideal. So maybe that's time to go ahead and start looking at my alignment. So maybe I'm chaotic something. But is it chaotic good? Maybe. Let's think a little more about it. Bond. Like, so if I'm this exile outcast, what is it that I really care about? What am I connected to? So in some of the choices that it offers here is like, my family, clan, or tribe is the most important thing in my life, even when they're far away from me. And that could still be true. Even if you're an outcast, you might still really care about them. Or, an injury to the unspoiled wilderness of my home is an injury to me. I will bring terrible wrath on the evildoers who destroyed my homeland. Oh, see, maybe they weren't really. No, I think outcast still feels right. I was going to say, what if their entire village was killed or something, and they were the only survivor? And one of them is, I am the last of my tribe. It is up to me to ensure their names enter legend. But I like this. I suffer awful visions of a coming disaster and will do anything to prevent it. And what if that's maybe why they were in exile, is that people didn't believe them, so they were kicked out for basically doomsaying, and so now they're out in the world trying to do what they can to try to prevent this disaster. I like that. Awful visions of a disaster, want to prevent it. Okay, and then flaws. So some of the ones that it offers here are, I'm too enamored of ale, wine, and other intoxicants. There's no room for caution and to live life to the fullest. I remember every insult I've received and nurse a silent resentment. I'm slow to trust members of other races, tribes, and societies. Violence is my answer to almost any challenge. Or, don't expect me to save those who can't save themselves. It is nature's way that the strong thrive and the weak perish. Yeah, see, I'm not sure I like any of those. Maybe slow to trust. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm a big fan of those. And you're not limited to the ones that are in there, but you have to try to think about something that's going to be not, how about this? This seems to fit in with some of what we've decided so far, is have feelings of inadequacy, from feelings of inadequacy. So this character's insecure, and maybe that's part of why around other people. Maybe that's why this character, also part of why they're kind of alone a lot of the time, is that they and maybe part of their social awkwardness is that they're always feeling a little bit like, oh, I don't belong here, or this is not what should be happening, that sort of thing. And so that all kind of can play into that. Oh, you know what? I just realized we didn't ever do the main hit points at this level. We did hit dice, and then the hit... I thought we did it. So the hit points at level 1 is 10 plus Constitution modifier, which is a plus 0. So that means hit points at level 1 is 10. And then you could say that you have 10 now, and then you would remove that, subtract that from here if you get any. All right, so let's figure out some of this other stuff. We're getting there. We're getting towards the end now. Trying to initiative. Okay. All right, hang on. Sorry, I'm flipping through. One of the things that you'll do a lot of as you build characters is flip through the source material. It's also kind of part of the fun, I think. But you know, let's see. Okay. What I'm looking up right now is I'm just double checking, because there's so much to keep in your head that it doesn't hurt to have this stuff kind of on hand, so to speak. And I was just confirming my idea that your initiative bonus is the same as your dexterity bonus. So my dexterity bonus here is plus 2. So there. So when you roll for initiative, I would roll a d20 and then add plus 2. And that will help determine what order everybody goes in. So if my character wants to prevent this awful disaster, that sounds like a good. It would be a not necessarily a best for everybody, but sort of a big picture good, but even still. So I'd say that makes my alignment chaotic good. And then experience points is 0 to start. Still don't have a name. Maybe we'll do the name right at the end. So let's briefly talk about our attacks. All right. So we've got mace, spear, longbow are our primary things. We also have this staff that we could probably attack with, but maybe not as not above the spear and the longbow, because I picked those already. So we have the mace, and we get the table. Let's see, it says how the maces work. So a mace is a strength weapon. Oh, you know what? It just occurred to me. I picked the mace and the spear early on, but the mace is a strength weapon only, whereas if I choose a finesse weapon, like a dagger, then I could use my dexterity instead. You know what? I'll just I'll just leave them as they are, because that's what I picked, and we'll move forward. But so my mace is going to be, my attack bonus is my strength modifier plus 1, and my proficiency bonus, because I'm proficient with maces. So that's plus 3, which means my attack bonus is plus 3. So what that means is that if I'm attacking with my mace, and I have to roll an attack roll, I roll the d20, and I add my attack bonus. So if I roll a 10 and I add 3, then my attack is 13. And then that is paired against the armor class of the enemy. So if the armor class of the enemy is 13 or less, then I hit. Or rather, 12 or less. So my attack roll has to be better than their armor class. Likewise, if an enemy was doing an attack roll against me, it would have to roll better than 13 to hit me. And then if I hit, a mace does 1d6 bludgeoning damage, and then you would add your attack bonus. So it is 1d6 plus 3. So if I hit with my mace, I would roll a d6, which is your standard cube one, and then you add 3 to that. So let's say I roll a 2, and I add 3. That would mean I do 5 points of bludgeoning damage, and I'll indicate that with a B here. Then my spear has 2 ways for it to work. I can jab, which is also strength. So spear, jab. And that's also going to be a plus 3 because it's still my strength and my proficiency. And then that does 1d6 plus 3 piercing damage. But if I throw the spear instead, then I'm using dexterity because I'm aiming a precise throw instead of just using physical force. So the spear would use dexterity and my proficiency modifier. So that's plus 4. Oops. And it still does 1d6, but this time plus 4 piercing. However, I also have a longbow. So I need to add this below. I only have the 3 rows in this standard form. But the longbow also uses dexterity. And so that's plus 2. It's also going to be plus 4 because I'm proficient. And then a longbow does 1d8 piercing damage. Whoops, d8 plus 4 piercing. But I also have to remember that takes an arrow to use. So you have to kind of keep track. Like, you know, do you have enough arrows? And you might play a game where they're not going to track the specific number of arrows and just imagine you kind of always have enough. But you might also need to keep track. So you can see that when I look at these different attack options, the longbow takes 2 hands. Oh, you know what? And it's also, my spear is versatile, which means that I can also use it as a 2-handed jab. Spear, 2-hand jab is going to be still plus 4, or excuse me, plus 3, but if I'm using it 2-handed, then it is a 1d8 plus 3 piercing. So you can see, first of all, most of my weapons do piercing damage, except for my mace, which does bludgeoning damage, and that's gonna not always apply, but in certain specific circumstances, it might. You might have a certain enemy type that is vulnerable to one type of damage and immune to another, for example. But just in terms of what is my most powerful attacks, it looks right now like the longbow generally allows me to do an attack where I'm, more likely to hit and I do the most damage. But if, for example, I take the 2-handed fighting type, when I get to level 2, what that would allow me to do is to make 2 attacks, one with each weapon. So if I have my mace and my spear jab, I'm just pulling it up, and so you can always kind of do that. So for example, if I'm doing my 2-handed jab or the longbow, I have to use both my hands for that. But if I have my mace and my spear in one in each hand, then I can do the mace attack and the spear attack. Now, ordinarily, I know this gets complicated. Without the two-handed fighting feature, what that would mean is that whatever's my dominant hand, I have this +3 bonus. So if I have the mace in my dominant hand, and I attack with it and I hit, then it does 1d6 + 3. And if I have the spear in the other hand and I hit, I would do just 1d6 without the +3. But then if I take the two weapon fighting at level 2, then it would also be, then both would have the +3. See? And so that means that the advantage of doing an attack with the mace and the spear jab in one turn is 2 attacks which do a little less damage each. They're each a little bit less likely to hit, but I do both attacks and I have both still in my hand. Whereas the throwing of the spear maybe does a little bit more damage, a little more likely to hit, but then I don't have it in my hands anymore. Likewise, the longbow, I could potentially run out of arrows. So those are all things just to keep in mind. And so that's what I have to start. And my staff, you know, we could go ahead and put it there since I have it. Okay. So because I have the staff, and the staff is considered... Oh, you know what? A quarterstaff. Oh, I don't know if the quarterstaff is the same. Because it said in the equipment that I have a staff. It doesn't say a quarterstaff, but I'm going to interpret that as meaning a quarterstaff. So the staff is a simple melee weapon. And that also would be basically the same as the mace in a lot of ways, except so it can be one-handed, is +3 because it's the strength, and then it does 1d6 +3 bludgeoning, and then staff two-handed because it is also versatile. And so I know that a lot of this is complicated, and that's why you have the source material and you take your time. But this is basically kind of how it works. The staff, the two-handed, is also still going to be strength, so the modifier is +3. And then if you're using the staff two-handed, then it's also 1d8 +3. So, just like with the spear, and the spear can be jabbed with one hand, jabbed with two hands, or thrown. Staff can be used with one hand, whacked with two hands, and then the mace is just more simple, you just hit. So it's a one-handed weapon. And so that means that in combat, if I am just... we have 0 temporary hit points. In combat, if I am just hitting things with my weapons, which is mostly what I'm going to do at level 1 because I don't have spells yet, these are my options. I have a number of options, and so, for example, the longbow has, or the thrown spear, have the limitations that we talked about earlier. I don't have it in my hands anymore, but it could be done without getting too close to the to whatever I'm fighting. Just occurred to me too, I should include the ranges for the various items. So the longbow range is 150 to 600. And what that means is that if I am shooting at something that's within 150 feet, I fire at normal. If I fire at something that's more than 150 feet away, but within 600 feet, I can still attack, but I attack at disadvantage. And again, the disadvantage means you roll twice, and you pick the lower one. And then, if it's farther than 600 feet away, you just can't hit it at all. And likewise, the spear throwing let's, spear throwing is 20, 60. Can't throw the spear as far as you can shoot an arrow from a longbow. All right, so a number of combat options here, and lots of other things. And we've got sort of starting to figure out what's this character like as a person. Inspiration, I should just add, is something that the DM might give you if they feel like you did something really cool, and that sort of thing. So let's start talking a little bit about the backstory. So if we go back to what gnomes are like, and this, again, we're getting close to the end here. What are gnomes like? So this gnome, at age 40 or so, is when they're expected to be kind of an adult. And I feel like I want to say that this character's been around a little bit. And so maybe they're a little older, and so maybe even old compared to a human, but not necessarily old compared to a dwarf. So I'm going to say that they're 83 years old. And then height and weight, we have to keep in mind that this is a gnome. They're very small compared to, compared to humans. And so there is a nifty little table right here in the book. Like, I could just decide what I think it ought to be, too. But let's use the table just for fun. So, for a gnome, we have a base height of 2'11". But then we roll die to determine it. And so, according to this table, I'm going to roll 2d4. And d4 is this little pyramid-shaped one. So I roll that once, and it's a 1, and then a 4. So 2d4 is adding 5. Adding 5 inches to 2'11" is going to be 3 foot 4 inches. Not very big. All right, and then weight comes from that. So we start with a base weight of 35 pounds, and then we add the number of pounds based on the number of die we rolled, which was 5. So that would be 40 pounds. All right. So now let's look at what it talks about with coloring. What are rock gnomes look like? And once again, you could just decide all of this for yourself. If you want your character to look a certain way, probably no one's going to really fight you on what your character looks like. But if we want to deep into the source material here and be inspired by what they offer as suggestions, let's see what they would typically look like. A rock gnome. Let's see. Oh, interesting. I feel like usually it does have a little bit more. I'm looking for where, because usually it does have some guidances to coloring. Okay, it says their tan or brown faces are usually adorned with broad smiles beneath their prodigious noses, and their bright eyes shine with excitement. Their fair hair has a tendency to stick out in every direction. And so that's what it says most gnomes look like. So we could have this gnome be typical or unusual. And we could also, for example, she might have blonde hair, but it's kind of always kind of filthy, and so it looks darker, for example. Well, let's just go ahead and say brown eyes and tan skin and dirty blonde. All right. So we've got that basic idea. We're not really going to have any allies or organizations, not at level 1, or any features and traits or treasure, and spells we talked about wouldn't really be until level 2 anyway. Let's see. Clarify there. And then appearance would be if we had a picture, which I don't have presently because we kind of made it up as we were going along. But let's see, backstory. Backstory, we've got this outcast. So let's say was growing up as a typical member of her rock gnome society, working as a craftsman, but started having visions of doom. No one would believe her. She lost her betrothed and the respect her community because she would not remain silent about her visions. Silent about her visions. She decided to set out on her own, hoping to stop the horrific events she foresaw. Since then, she has been looking for clues and exploring the Underdark. All right, so that's a good backstory, and we could probably fill that in with a bit more detail if we wanted. Or we could also kind of see how the game progresses, and you can always enhance and refine this stuff. And so let's say it's time for a name, right? So because we're kind of drawing from the material here, we can look at some of its offered source material. So for example, gnomes, it says gnomes love names, and most have half a dozen or so. Each family member would give the gnome a different name. There's various other nicknames, and lots of times they might have lots of different names, and it gives different examples. Some female names would be like Brina, Ella, Mardnab, Nissa, Oda, Orla, Rowan, Shamil, Tana, Waywacket. Waywacket. I love that. Waywacket. And clan names would be like Baron, Dargle, Folkor, Garrick. I like Garrick. So how about Waywacket? Garrick. And then there's lots of nicknames. It offers lots of nicknames. I don't know. We'll think about. We can always think more about nicknames. So Waywacket Garrick, the Rock Gnome Ranger, exploring the Underdark for a secret to forestall the apocalyptic vision that drove her away from her clan. So now we've got a character, and I could look around for gnome images online and maybe find one that looks good. Lots of people, also do their own. Oh, I just remembered we didn't ever fill out these skills, so we can just do that really quick, and then that'll be it for the character sheet. As with the saving throws, basically we look at each of these skills and we apply the appropriate modifier, unless we're proficient, in case we add the proficiency as well. So, for example, acrobatics is dexterity, so that's +2. Animal handling is wisdom, so that's also +2. Arcana is intelligence, +1. Athletics is strength, which would be +1, except also I'm proficient, so it's going to be +3. Deception is charisma. That's going to be a -1. Not good at lying, our poor Waywocket. Intelligence is also going to be a +1 because that's history is intelligence. Insight, wisdom is +2. Intimidation is charisma, and that's -1. She's not a very scary looking individual, not good at intimidating people. But investigation, intelligence, she is also proficient, so that's going to be another +3. Medicine is wisdom, that'd be like first aid, +2 from wisdom. Nature is intelligence, and she's also proficient, so that's going to be another +3. Perception for wisdom is going to be +2. Performance for charisma is another -1. Don't ask her to put on a show or sing. Persuasion, same deal. Religion is intelligence-based, that's +1. Sleight of hand is dexterity, so that's going to be a +2. And then stealth is dexterity, +2, and she's proficient. So that's another +2, so that's +4. Oops. And then survival is wisdom-based, so that's +2, and she's proficient, so that's also +4. So stealth and survival. And then passive wisdom, perception, is basically 10 plus whatever this modifier is. So in this case, it will be 12. All right. So, So, we now have Waywocket Garrick, the Rock Gnome Ranger, exploring the Underdark. And that is the creation of a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition character. I hope that this was helpful to you. I am absolutely looking for constructive criticism for these videos. And then also, the adventure will continue. We have episode 1 of our actual D&D play adventure already up on the feed and on this playlist, this channel. And then you're also going to have session 2 for that on Wednesday, the 26th. So enjoy. Oh, the last thing I think I was going to just mention is that role-playing your character, you can kind of decide how much you want to do that, and you sort of read the room at the table you're at. Are people speaking in character voices, for example? Some people like to do it in third person, so instead of saying, oh, I do this, they would say, Waywocket does this. Waywocket does that. Or you say it in characters, like, and so if I'm imagining what's this character like, well, she's a gnome, so she's small, so maybe her voice is a little higher. She's a little socially awkward, maybe she's in her head a lot, and you just kind of try to, maybe she mumbles a little bit, and that maybe ties into the low charisma, but she's always kind of aware, and she's always kind of fidgeting with stuff, and she talks kind of like this, and you just sort of try to decide based on the sorts of things she does, what she might sound like or act like, and then you just decide how to incorporate that into the game. And so I did the wrap up already, so I hope you enjoyed, and I will go ahead and close this now, and I will make a few of the links that I talked about available in the notes, and I will also post this character sheet on the podcast notes as well, so that you guys can look at your leisure. All right. Thank you for listening and or watching. And need to figure out how to stop the stream. All right.